So this is why Apache Cordova and PhoneGap still exist. State of the Mobile Web 2014. So the story behind this is I originally pitched this talk to OSCON, which I speak at each year, and then I was invited to come and deliver this talk here. So you guys get to see this talk before OSCON. So it'll probably be the very same talk. But I was also asked to change the name at OSCON. So it's also known as Apache Cordova, Past, Present, and Future. So this talk will cover the history of PhoneGap, how it got started, why we did it, as well as why we made the decisions we made, how we dealt with user outrage, all the gory details, including becoming part of Adobe and PhoneGap becoming Apache Cordova. Well, the open source part of PhoneGap becoming Apache Cordova. So what is Apache Cordova? How many people know what Apache Cordova is? Okay, so about half, a little more than half the room. Basically, Apache Cordova is the open source version of PhoneGap. It is the same project. You can build apps with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, build your UI and the logic you want to share between your apps in JavaScript and HTML and CSS, and then you can build cross-platform apps and distribute them via the App Store. And it's PhoneGap. And so what makes PhoneGap interesting is that instead of just having HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you also have access to device APIs through a bridge between the browser and the actual device APIs, which are now pluginized. So we decided to do this partly for security concerns and partly just because people were hauling around way too many APIs with PhoneGap when they were doing development. So someone would say use geolocation to find out where stores are located in their app. But they'd also have contacts for no reason, a accelerometer for no reason. So we decided to actually make it so that if you need geolocation, you can set it up so that you can only get geolocation code with your app. So you're not distributing everything. And so that also means that there's a large set of community APIs, so you can put add-ons. And this can be found at a website, plugins.cordova.io, for a full list of all the plugins. I'll just go to it here. So here's the website for the plugins that you can use. Okay. And we help you put your app in the App Store. We don't guarantee that your app will get submitted. We can guarantee that the reason your app is rejected is not PhoneGap for the Apple App Store. It'll probably be some other weird thing like a third-party plugin, or maybe your app's doing something weird like downloading JavaScript and after the person got the app and executing it. That's a big no-no in the App Store. But we can tell you that nothing that we're doing will prevent your app from getting accepted. And the people involved in Cordova Dev are the following companies and the following people. There's a ton of individual contributors, but the main companies that are working on Cordova today are Adobe, where I work. BlackBerry works on their own platform these days. Google does a lot of work on Apache Cordova and their downstream distribution, Chrome package apps. Microsoft works on Windows Phone. IBM was the first big company we've worked with for PhoneGap and Cordova Dev. They work on iOS, Android, and BlackBerry. Intel is a relative newcomer to the Cordova Dev community, and I'm going to talk a lot about them in this talk. Firefox, they do Firefox OS work, and LG, who has inherited WebOS and does WebOS TV. WebOS lives on. Yay, or whatever. However you feel about it. If you're looking to contribute to the project, like you know about PhoneGap already and you're comfortable with Java and you think PhoneGap's a cool idea and you want to add plugins, or you don't like the plugin API because you think some of the decisions we made were stupid, I think some of the decisions we made were stupid. It's okay. You can find out on our wiki. And our wiki is on the Apache Wiki. It's a moin, and the URL is wiki.apache.org/Cordova/contributor workflow. So this talks about how to become a contributor and work on our open source project. Anyone can come on to our dev list and say stuff. I mean, within reason, of course. That said, I wonder how some people say what they say. All right, so the story of Cordova. How many people are actual Cordova and PhoneGap devs, like have made a whole app with it? Okay, so who here, so would you remember Nitobi?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to tell the whole story. So the original goal of PhoneGap was what we always said was to cease to exist. The idea was that these like iOS SDK and Android, this was sort of a phase, and that eventually people will just use HTML and JavaScript to make apps because the web will get better, and there's so many web developers it would make sense not to do this. Honestly, yeah, we still exist because that definitely hasn't come to pass. We started in 2008. So in early 2008, the iOS 2.0 came out with the iPhone SDK, and they had this example code for UI Webview. So a couple guys, one of them's named Brock Witten, the other one Rob Ellis, who worked at Nitobi at the time, went down to iPhone Dev Camp 2 and worked on their project, which was PhoneGap. And it was iOS only because iOS was the only thing you could really develop PhoneGap on at the time. And they came back, and they're like, look what we made. We have a mobile solution now. I'm like, okay, that's cool. Look, we're the future. You have to go work on your Rails project. And then I was working on some client project. And it wasn't one of the really good client projects, I'll tell you that. When we were working at a small consultancy based out of Vancouver, Canada. And I heard about Android coming out, and I heard the promises about it being open. And I was like, okay, so it's open, but is it? And it sounds like it's actually going to like take off, not like OpenMoko, which clearly didn't. And basically, my definition of takeoff is, can I buy this at a store in the US? Like, can I go to Blaine and buy this thing? Not Blaine, Bellingham and buy this thing. So Android 1.0 came out, and someone went to Blaine and bought a T-Mobile G1, which only did Edge in Canada, did not do 3G. And we developed PhoneGap on it. And Android 1.0 actually came out. Actually, we were doing dev on the emulator, and Android 1.0 came out the same day PhoneGap 0.01 for Android came out. So so that was pretty cool. But it was pretty clear what took off in those days, especially in Canada, where you had to go to the States to buy an Android phone. So all the dev shops in town were literally, why are you bothering with this? It's not going to go anywhere. Android, it's not going to go anywhere. This is just a thing. Who cares? Go work on iOS. It's the future. So iOS was the priority, trying to convince people that you don't need to use Objective-C to create apps with iOS. You can do it with HTML and JavaScript. This was also the time when people were getting their apps rejected in the App Store because they were doing exactly what I told people not to do. Downloading JavaScript and interpreting it after you bought the app in the App Store, which is verboten in the guidelines for obvious reasons, because the whole bait and switch. So this is what was going on in 2009. We eventually got the App Store issues resolved, and a lot of other people were also facing apps issues. It wasn't just us. Anyone who wasn't using Objective-C was facing issues with the Apple App Store at this time. And yeah, there's tons of horror stories of apps getting rejected for no good reason. So 2010 was really when the open source project took off. 2010 was the year we decided to go to OSCON in Portland. We went to OSCON in San Jose the year before. I didn't go. I decided to sit that one out. So it was a friend of mine's birthday the night before we did our first workshop. So we ended up getting destroyed. And a coworker of mine, one of the guys who does most of these talks, Brian LaRue, and I were sitting at a desk at a conference very similar to this, just huddled over our keyboards, trying not to look up. Meanwhile, in the back of the room, there are 3 people from IBM and we're like really stoked about this. We're like, we gotta show up. We have to be here. We need to talk to these guys from IBM. This is gonna be cool. And then they show up and they talk to us, and we're like, hey. And somehow we didn't scare them off. And they became contributors and did a whole ton of work on the project. One of which was actually Simon McDonald, who probably wrote over half. He actually had the most commits until recently on the Apache Cordova project, and was a major force in actually getting stuff resolved on Stack Overflow. He's probably the #1 list for people who actually answer Apache Cordova questions. So yeah, getting IBM involved was super important, super awesome. They also changed how we did our CLA so that it was less sketchy and less fly-by-night. Because at this point, we were just this tiny consultancy. And we're like, yeah, we'll take the code. We'll take your code. We own it now, but we'll take your code. And that's the growing pains of an open source project. And then we have more growing pains. So we finally hit 1.0 in 2011. 1.0 was a pretty big deal. And 2011 was also when we got acquired by Adobe. And when we got acquired by Adobe, this is how it went down. We were all in our office, and then a VP shows up and says, hey, I'm your new boss, pretty much. And then they have the huddle, and we find out we're all staying on, and that we're getting raises, and like all the happy parts, and then the other part of if you have to move to San Francisco part. And then followed by the, oh crap, Adobe has this thing called Air. You know, as soon as this hits the public, everyone's going to freak out and leave and say that we're dead. What do we do? So we decided that we were going to donate the code to Apache. So we donated, so basically looked around. Every other foundation we found was technology specific. It wouldn't make sense for us to go to the Linux Foundation because we have very little to do with Linux, like as far as the technology wise. We're way more higher level than anything that happens in the kernel or around device systems. And we would not ever use a GPL. Eclipse Foundation, sort of same deal. jQuery Foundation, hell no, because that would mean picking a winner in the JavaScript framework thing. So we decided to go with Apache, which it's okay. It's I complain a lot about it at times, but it's okay. It's could have done worse. And then we got more committers, and then we decided to try this thing called Cadence, which is where you release, where you put a minor release every month on a predictable schedule, and you release whatever is stable. If it's not stable, it doesn't go in. And then we hit 1 million downloads. And this is when we started introducing things like the embeddable Cordova Webview, which allows Android developers to put in if they need a Webview that has Cordova APIs, they can actually embed it in their app, as long as they implement the glue around it. And we hit 1 million downloads. And then 2013 is when we hit 3.0, and this is when we have Google in and other big companies, and we're arguing all the time about the API. And this is when we really actually feel like we're a real open source project instead of like some guys working at a freelance thing doing contract work to pay the bills type stuff. This is really this is pretty much where we roughly are today. With over 2 million downloads and 5 or 6 different frameworks that are all based off the same framework. And 2014, well, I guess that's why I'm here to talk about this, because I actually have some cool stuff to show off. So let's talk about some real things with Cordova, and Android in particular. Is it possible to actually build a quick app? Yeah, it's possible. It takes work. But people actually do make apps with Cordova. I don't have demos of those apps in particular. I mean, I can show you Untapped. I'm sure everyone's already seen it. And I can show you a couple apps that are passable. But what I really want to talk about today is it possible to quickly build a fast app using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that actually has a consistent look and feel across devices? And namely, and yeah, it takes work. And it takes work because Android Webview is the IE6 of mobile development. Android Webview's god-awful. It is terrible. It is a terrible, terrible browser. It's not Chrome. It's not WebKit. It's just something they pull out of the tree. And it's different on each device. And it's what people beat us over the head with every time they talk about why PhoneGap sucks. PhoneGap sucks because Android Webview sucks. PhoneGap sucks because Android Webview sucks. And it's something that's annoyed us for years. And this would include things like rendering issues where you'd have to use media queries. Not because you want to use media queries, but because absolute positioning doesn't work unless you use media queries. IFrame support just breaking because it doesn't support the URIs for Android assets that we need to actually bundle your app to deliver it. Support for Android resources and Android assets in general. URI encoding bugs where they decide to change the URIs for galleries, and somehow that doesn't parse as a real URI anymore. Browser history bugs, where the history just plain doesn't work with certain characters. And text fields, which is actually in KitKat. If you're doing text field validation on an Android WebView in KitKat, it will actually fail because there's a bug with the text view. Sure, you could do all these other crazy 3D CSS stuff, but your text validation will break. And they shipped it. So when you're dealing with it today, this is the reality. And the reality isn't actually that bad. So the majority of the majority here, this is all Jelly Bean. Jelly Bean has a passable browser. It's not the greatest, but it's probably the most consistent browser out there for Android. And most people have Jelly Bean. And then there's KitKat, which has awesome features, but a lot of basic breakage went through because they really wanted to get Chrome 30 out. Chrome 30 also has the same problems with text fields on Android. Unfortunately, Chrome 30 can be upgraded. Android WebView can't. Gingerbread still exists. Honeycomb doesn't, thankfully. Honeycomb was terrible. Froyo doesn't really exist. It exists more than Honeycomb. An ice cream sandwich exists, unfortunately, and it's also terrible. So what will happen usually is whenever someone encounters one of these issues, they'll come in, I'll ask them what type of phone it is. And I have a device library of hundreds of phones. Unfortunately, they also go on tour for demos, so I was only able to bring like 3 or 4 with me today. And I'll grab the phone, and I'll test it, and I'll confirm the bug, and then I'll look in Logcat and see a C stack trace. Normally you see Java stack traces when things go bad, but whenever you see like a memory dump and like C errors, you know instantly that there's something you can do. And then you have this sort of feeling of helplessness, because even if you fix the bug, you can't get it back into the Android open source project. You just have to find which bug tracker to put this bug in. and then you launch, and then you close this, won't fix. I filed a bug with the Android open source project. I'm really sorry. And yeah, I got sick of it, and so did everybody else. So, third-party Webviews. We're no longer going to settle with just using Android Webview. Android Webview is probably still pretty good for a lot of things. It has a lot of advantages. But we can now use other Webviews. You're no longer stuck with broken crap. Yay. So, and we're actually going to make it installable the same way we install plugins. So if you decide that you need to have a proper working Chrome and you want to develop your app with Chrome, you can actually install it. We're not developing the plugins ourselves. Other people have already done this. The first one we're coming out of the gate with will be Crosswalk, because it's the first one that's actually working. And I actually have a demo for that. And because this is so early, I still have to use this to launch it. Actually, so first I'll show you the source code for this demo. How many people are familiar with 3.js or have heard of it? You, awesome. All right, so those of you who aren't, I'm not actually using any Cordova APIs here. I'm just using 3 and the Collado loader, which is the only way I can find to load this object that our designer made. I set up a camera. I load the 3D model in. I set a rotation on the model. I rotate the model because it's facing down for some reason. I set up a soft ambient light, and I animate it. So what this looks like, let's see. What this looks like on the browser is this. Okay, bad. All right, good thing it actually works on the device. You know what? Let's do this, because All right, so this isn't possible today with PhoneGap. This is only possible with Crosswalk. And no, I don't. Okay, so that's why. By the way, if anyone can source me good USB cables that don't break from heavy usage, that would be awesome. This demo just got almost got thwarted by a bad USB cable. Yeah. So that's, I mean, there's obviously still bugs with this. Actually, I think this is a 3.js bug. So see, I changed the orientation, and now, yeah, that still needs to be fixed. But that at least shows you what you can do with a third-party Webview. But that's not the main thing that makes me happy about third-party Webviews. So what makes me happy about third-party Webviews is this. Here's a question. How many people are running Android in the room? Okay, keep your hands up. How many people put your hands down if you're running KitKat? Okay. Put your hands down if you're running Jelly Bean. That's KitKat. Put your hand down. You haven't upgraded? Oh, no, dude, it's awesome. All right. Okay. So this phone is running Ice Cream Sandwich. It's a Motorola Razr. I think it's one of this phone in particular, and I don't have issues. It does weird things to my computer. But I'm going to demonstrate what happens if I just run regular Cordova on it today. As I said, it has issues with my computer. Yeah, those issues. And I'm going to use the command line. Okay, so this is the stable Cordova project that you would use from the command line. So that. Actually, let's make sure this is plugged in. Okay. So it's going to do a build using Ant. It's going to install this app. This is stock Cordova. Well, not stock Cordova. This is Cordova 3.4 stable. And it's going to run a demo from 2 years ago. Okay, so yay, the demo's running. What if I wanted to debug this demo? Now on Android 4.4, I can use Chrome Development Tools and ADB to debug. But on here, I can't. So if I go back to my browser, all right, and I go the inspection targets, I can see the phone, but I can't see Cordova. And I won't be able to see that Cordova. But okay, same exact phone. Oh, come on. I think I know why. So, remember how I said how browsers behave differently? Well, one thing that you have to remember is that occasionally they'll do things that don't immediately make sense, like deprecate certain meta tags, like the device density. Or I might have to actually use something smart. So I'm using a command called plugman, which I probably switched back to my VGA. All right, so I actually realized that I didn't fully set up this demo, which is actually good for you because you can actually see how I did it. So right here, I'm using plugman to install my web engine. And now I'll install the web engine like a plugin. Okay, so now we're using crosswalk. Which means now if I do you know what? I'll just show you how it works on Android 4.4. This is the problem when you're doing live stuff. Okay. Yeah.
Is this a similar theme as what is it, Titanium Studio?
No, this is totally. This is. There's a lot of differences between this and Titanium Studio.
They're both basically taking JavaScript to run on Android and iOS.
Yeah, the difference is Titanium uses takes JavaScript and does this compilation step where it tries to reference it against native APIs, which means that you're actually using native UI elements, which has its upsides and downsides.
Okay.
Whereas this uses the Webview that's existing on the device. Yeah. So if you want to do UI, you use HTML and JavaScript. If you do UI on Titanium, you use Titanium's APIs to build the UI. Which means that if you want to like just make a straight up HTML5 app later, you have to rewrite it. Whereas with us, it is an HTML. Okay. Okay, good. So let's run that demo. And of course, it's doing this thing again. Okay, so what we can do is we can actually see what's going on here. If you go back to the dock camera, you can see it rotate. Now, if we go back in here and then decide to add another, let's see what light is. Okay, so we have a light object. Back to the computer. And let's change, let's see. Let's change the color. Actually, let's just add a new light. Now let's make it blue. Okay. Then we go add it to the scene. Then okay, that did nothing. All right. So you can see at least that we can sort of modify this. And if I go elements, I can actually, here we go. Back to the dock camera. I can at least inspect parts of it. Oh, and it actually did kind of turn blue, just really crappily blue. All right. So, unfortunately, this DOM's kind of boring. But that's basically the demo that went horribly bad. Sorry about that. So the downs, yeah.
So how are you able to see the logs on your Chrome? Like, are you using any KitKat or?
How am I able to see logs? In Chrome Developer Tools, you can actually see console.log in your console. So back when I was in Chrome Developer Tools, all right, let's go back there.
I'm not able to see on my Chrome when I'm testing that.
If you're not using Android 4.4 right now, you won't. Just KitKat right now. So if my copy of the web engine compiled today, what you could do is you could actually see, like for some reason I was doing dev last night and it went bad. Or it's in the wrong directory or something. So if it actually worked, what would have happened is that you could actually inspect what's on your phone if you're running something lower than KitKat, like Jelly Bean or something earlier, because it'd be running a different version of Chrome on here. So because this Nexus 7 is running, because the Nexus 7 is running Android 4.4, it's not as impressive as the demo, unfortunately, and that's why the demo failed.
So, sorry, I understand like what we're saying is you have a KitKat SDK running on your laptop.
Well, no, you don't even need the KitKat SDK. You just need KitKat. Well, you do need the KitKat SDK to actually build your app in Cordova. But if you have a phone and it's running PhoneGap, and you have your app in debug mode installed on it, all you need is the Chrome Dev tool to actually go in and hook up into it. And then you can see your console.logs directly in your Chrome.
What is Samsung S3 versus running on 4G?
What Samsung phone?
I mean, Samsung S3?
It should have updated. It might be stuck on.
4G, which is
It's just unless. So this would actually. So once this comes out, it'll actually directly help you in your development, because you can actually install this third-party Webview and get the same thing that Android 4.4 users are getting. Assuming that, yeah, I can't believe whatever. All right, so here's the thing. It makes your app a lot bigger. Instead of Android WebView bugs, you have third-party bugs. So whatever weirdness happens on the new third-party browser, but it might not start as fast. You might notice slower start times. We noticed that with stable versions of Crosswalk that we were testing. And this is solving minor problems. Like if you're using this to solve your minor CSS problems, this is a sledgehammer solution. But I'm going to close with this statement. Having a sledgehammer is better than not having anything. If you have to hammer in a nail and you have nothing to hammer this nail in, you're pretty much, yeah. But if you have a rock, then you can hammer it in with a rock. And if you have a sledgehammer, well, that's the hammer. And you get to figure that out. This lives on a dev branch. This is very bleeding edge. I just got cut with it in this demo. We hope to have Mozilla Gecko View running. Right now, it's not. We're actually working with Mozilla to get that working, and this will land in Cordova 4. And that's basically where this feature currently lives. And to summarize, so in 2014, the web still isn't a first-class platform on mobile, but we can make web apps actually behave like first-class citizens. And when I say web apps, I mean HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Not just JavaScript and compiling magic, but actually straight up HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There are definitely a lot more tools now. In addition to, as I demonstrated, there's the Chrome development kit, and there's a whole bunch of Chrome development tools, and there's a whole bunch of tools in Chrome that actually help you prototype your app and emulate different browser resolutions. And third-party web views are going to be awesome when they finally work. So that's pretty much it. I can answer any questions. We have a whole bunch of time, it looks like, to actually answer them.
Cordova builds, one of the challenges is, especially when we do package development, finding the structure that we should be pushing into the repository.
Okay.
And sometimes, if you push up the Cordova build, the platform directory, and when someone else in the team downloads that, they have an issue building the app.
Ah.
So, what is your recommendation on?
Are you doing custom work on platforms?
Yes.
Okay. Can you pluginize that?
Oh, which one, sorry?
Can you make a plugin out of your custom work?
Probably, like say for example, right, I changed the app name or the playlist file on the iOS, and for that, do we have any plugins to do it?
plist?
Yeah.
There should be hooks to install. Yeah, I don't know. There should be hooks to do it, but yeah, you might actually have to check in the. It should be possible to check in the plist, but not the rest of the project, and actually, or to actually keep a local copy of your plist somewhere, and then like have instructions to copy it over before you do a build step. Just because you don't want to actually like haul around all the platforms, because I mean, you're assuming that if you have everybody's dev machine the same, it should build. But I found that it's really hard unless you're using like something, unless you're like virtualizing it and using Vagrant or something to actually keep these machines being the same.
Yeah, and one of the other ones is, say, for example, the Apache Cordova plugin in that browser.
Oh, in that browser.
And I'm customizing that.
Okay.
So, and I don't want to change the package name because I want to credit the Apache for the initial. We have built it, right? I mean, I want to credit them. So, whenever I'm making a change, should I store all the custom changes that will be copied to the platforms?
So,
the repository.
well, you're changing the plugin code, right?
Right.
Yeah, I would change. I would save that in a separate repository and maybe even change the namespace
Okay.
so that because you're forking that at that point.
Sorry, one more question.
Okay.
I'm the plugman. So, in the plugman,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's great that, you know, Cordova introduced that as part of the 3.3 or 3.4. 3.4, right?
It was in there as early as 3.0 because
3.4, yeah.
because when CLI was released, the platform maintainers were like, we're not using this because we can't make it work with Eclipse and Xcode
So,
initially.
Great. And how can we integrate that with Jenkins or some other continuous integration for the dependencies?
How can you... I think you got me on that one.
Yeah, for the continuous integration, we should be able to pull up these on the fly and be able to build it.
Right. Can you mention that after? I actually want to get this your question. Which? I haven't really looked at it. I've heard of the AppGyver guys. You know, whenever someone claims, like, makes crazy claims about PhoneGap, we just kind of ignore them and keep on keeping on. The part of the reason we're doing third-party Webview is because we're sick of the third-party Webview and we're sick of everyone beating our heads over basically the one flaw in our approach. Ideally, it would be better if everyone hopped on the third-party Webview bandwagon and created stable, awesome third-party Webviews that compiled. And because that would be way better than, I'm going to create the PhoneGap killer, or I'm going to make the thing that makes PhoneGap not suck. But, I mean, we're Adobe, right? And one thing you got to remember is just because you join a big company doesn't mean you get more resources. We're the same team we've always been as far as the PhoneGap team. We haven't had like magical Flash developers come out of the sky and be like, I want to work on your project. In fact, we've had the opposite. So that's one thing that's one cultural change we've noticed is that when you're a plucky little startup and you're like, you got your open source project, everyone loves you and they're on your side. The moment you start joining a big corp, then that's why you really need the Apache community around you. So then to actually keep the community in focus, because it's really easy for people to take pot shots at big companies.
So it seems like you're doing a Webview plugin because mobile doesn't have every Webview, right?
Yeah.
But iOS is a lot closer to being everything. But is there any reason to try to do a Webview plugin on iOS?
Well, you can't, because iOS would actually say that's against their release policy.
But
Yeah, there is.
Does it break that rule?
I can't comment.
I just said that you can't like do WebGL. They've had WebGL in their browser.
Yeah. Every browser on mobile has WebGL, but not in the actual Android WebView. So
is Chrome getting around like Opera did initially, where they were kind of pre-compressing the pages and then they were just displaying something?
I don't know exactly what Google's doing. I mean, I've heard things, but I'm not going to repeat them here while I'm being recorded. Because
Turn off the camera now.
yeah, if we could turn off the camera and press this button, I can. Yeah, I can voice my opinion, and this is my opinion only. So I'm going to turn this off.